Welcome back. Today we take up one of my favorite topics in all of law, and that has to do with the prohibition on religious discrimination. And as you'll see, religious discrimination has a lot of differences from the other types of discrimination that we discuss. Religious discrimination is different than those other forms of discrimination prohibited by Title VII. And if you stop to think about it, you can probably figure out why. When you look at things like race, color, sex, national origin, those are all things that you're born with. They're conditions that exist at birth and things that you cannot change. They are immutable. But religion is not a physical characteristic. It's not an immutable, unchangeable characteristic. Instead, it's a set of beliefs, not a physical characteristic like the basis for the other types of discrimination. And more than just a set of beliefs, religion is also practice. It's what we do. And this, in terms of employment law, is quite extraordinary because, as I mentioned early on in the class, employers discriminate all the time. They discriminate on the basis of things like education and experience and attitude and initiative, and they discriminate against tardy employees in favor of on-time employees, and they discriminate against unproductive employees in favor of productive employees. So an employer discriminates on the basis of what you do all the time. But when it comes to religion, religion is not just who you are, but what you do. And of course, that's going to lead to some conflicts. And this is why religious discrimination is a huge stumbling block for employers. And we are seeing increasingly claims filed in this area because of the peculiar nature of the prohibition on religious discrimination. So in this lecture, we're going to look at Title VII's protection against religious discrimination. Now, we know Title VII bans discrimination on the basis of religion. And the law treats religious discrimination differently. The bans on the other types of discrimination are meant to be cost-free. They are meant to not impose a burden on the employer. When it comes to race, just don't discriminate on race. It costs you nothing to not discriminate on the basis of race. We have to modify this a bit when talking about sex, but in terms of the goal, the idea is treat people the same. But when it comes to discrimination, the law anticipates that there will be a burden placed on employers. An employer is going to have to suffer some costs as a result of the prohibition on religious discrimination. Now, the ban on religious discrimination has a different objective. Our previous section was entitled Protecting Against Status Discrimination. The ban on religious discrimination, it has a different focus. And that focus is, it is meant to promote a socially valued activity. That we as a society have decided that religion is a value that we should invest in, that we should protect, and that we should promote. And that's what the ban on religious discrimination does. It's not about protecting against status discrimination, or very little of it is about that. It is primarily meant to promote a socially valued activity, to promote religion, as opposed to any other belief that you may have. Now, another factor having to do with religious organizations is that religious organizations receive broad protections under Title VII. Under Title VII, the religious organizations exemption exempts religious organizations from the prohibition on religious discrimination. What does that mean? That means that a religious organization, a religious employer, can discriminate on the basis of religion. So the ban on religious discrimination is different in a number of ways. And we start with the objective is different. But then we turn to something like this, where thousands and thousands of employers are automatically exempt from discrimination on the basis of one of the 5 protected classes of Title VII. So religious organizations are exempt from the law banning religious discrimination. Religious organizations can discriminate on the basis of religion. The case we have involves the Mormon Church in Utah and Mr. Amos. Mr. Amos was a custodian at a fitness center that belonged to the Mormon Church. Now, the fitness center was not a part of the church. It was not joined physically to a church. It was simply owned by the Mormon Church. And Mr. Amos had worked there for 16 years without incident. Now, the fitness center required its employees to be Mormons. And not only to be Mormons, but to be in good standing with the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church places continuing responsibilities on its members. And in this case, Mr. Amos had not complied with the demands of the Mormon Church in terms of his tithing, and therefore he was no longer a practicing Mormon as defined by the church. The fitness center fired Mr. Amos, saying, "We only hire Mormons." Now, Mr. Amos objects. He's had this job for 16 years. He's done a good job, and his firing had absolutely nothing to do with his job performance. So he files a lawsuit, and he says, this is religious discrimination. I'm being discriminated against on the basis of my religion. And furthermore, it's not a religious organization that's discriminating against me. It's a fitness club. And this fitness center was not open to just Mormons or just members of that particular church, but it was open to everyone. So it was operating just as a privately owned fitness center would. This case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, in large part because they don't want to get into the position of saying what is a religious organization and what is not, the Supreme Court sides with the Mormon Church, saying that the fitness center had a religious purpose, and that was enough to make it a religious organization.